I just found out that the UN Security Council, just had an emergency meeting a couple hours ago. So this here is basically just an update on stuff that went down. I was trying to did a live earlier, but after a while, I don't know if I was lightheaded because I was dehydrated, or if it's because it's so super hot. Um, I don't give an overview of what some people had to say about us being in Iran, but with that being said, here we go.
I want to bring in right now Suzanne Maloney, the Vice President and Director of the Foreign Policy Program at the Brookings Institution. It's a nonprofit focused on the U.S.'s role in international affairs. Suzanne, thanks for being here and joining the discussion. You have advised both Republican and Democratic administrations on Iran policy. Where does the U.S. and Iran's relationship go from here?
Yeah, where does
I
it
think
go?
we're really at a critical juncture for U.S. policy toward Iran and really for the future of the Islamic Republic itself. This has been an incredible series of setbacks for Iran, not just the Israeli strikes and then the American strikes that have crippled some key facilities of the nuclear program, but also the year that preceded it, in which Iran's proxy network around the region was largely rolled back by Israeli actions in Lebanon and in Gaza. And so Iran today has very few good options for retaliation that won't bring an even more dangerous attack on the Iranian homeland to them.
Yeah, and in that vein, I'm wondering what you make of this. The Trump administration had previously said that the attack had nothing to do with changing the government in Iran. Now the president just posted on social media the question of whether there should be regime change in that country. Is that even a possibility at this point?
I think, unfortunately, it's highly unlikely. The regime has spent 46 years cementing its control over society, and at a time of crisis and chaos and disruption to the kind of way of life in Iran, their control will be even greater. They've been cracking down on dissidents and critics and trying to force these staged examples of patriotism in the street with the rallies that they've convened. I think it's going to be very difficult to see any alternative power center emerge, especially because the current regime has kept such a tight grip on any type of competitors from within the system or even outside the system.
Also, the U.S. has warned of a heightened threat environment after yesterday's strikes, obviously here at the homeland and around the world. What are the realistic fears right now for retaliation in seeing how depleted Iran's military is right now, but they have other ways to retaliate?
They have a number of ways to retaliate. As mentioned in your remarks, they could certainly strike out at American forces around the region, either directly or through some of the proxy militias that they still control in Iraq and elsewhere. The Houthis have threatened to begin attacking American ships passing through the Red Sea once again, and they could launch cyber attacks, small-scale terrorist
Be
attacks
back
in
in a
third
sec.
countries against Americans or Israelis.
No,
We
wait
know
a minute.
they've already sought to do some of that. I think the biggest concern for retaliation, though, is a decision to try to race for a bomb. We know that at least some aspects of their nuclear infrastructure remain intact, that they may still have stockpiles of highly enriched uranium, and they may have some capabilities that we're not aware of. And so I think that's the real risk.
All right, Suzanne Maloney, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And here we are.
How I took our closet from this to this.
Modular closets help be designed for dream clutter. Our next guest has led the Arms Control Association's research and policy advocacy on a range of issues, including the cancellation of new nuclear weapons programs and the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, which President Trump withdrew from 2 years after the deal went into effect. Daryl Kimball, the executive director of the Arms Control Association, joins us now. Daryl, it's good to have you here. What has happened in the years following
negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the first nuclear deal, and it held back Iran's capabilities.
This heat is almost
They were
unbearable,
more than a
y'all.
year away from being able to
Stay cool,
just
stay
have the
cool
material,
wherever you
raw
are.
material for a nuclear weapon.
Lord
Donald Trump
have mercy.
complained that this was not good enough. He was urged by his advisors and many in the Republican Party to pull out of the deal. He made additional demands on the Iranians. They did not take the bait. They did not go to the negotiating table. And then beginning in 2019, they began building up their capabilities again. And since then, they have been amassing more highly enriched uranium. They've been increasing the number of machines, the centrifuges necessary to produce more. They've been reducing the International Atomic Energy Agency's access. So that's how we got to this point. So in many ways, the problem that we're facing today with the Iranian nuclear program is a problem very much of the Iranian making, of course, but also Donald Trump's decision in 2018. So, it's very disconcerting that President Trump, who said in his second term he wanted to renew talks with Iran, to reach a deal, to block its pathways to the bomb, he took an abrupt turn in June at the, I think, behest of the Israeli Prime Minister, and to pursue military action. In our estimate, this is in the long run going to make the likelihood of an Iranian bomb actually more likely. Yes, the successful mission by the B-2s and the cruise missiles was successful as a military mission, but there is no way that Iran's nuclear capabilities, its infrastructure, its materials can be wiped out with this massive but still kind of a single-shot military operation. There's a lot we don't know. The Iranians have probably taken away their highly enriched uranium to another secret location, and they have a third uranium enrichment site that is yet to be dealt with by the international community or these military strikes.
Well, we know what the president has said this, but talk a little bit more about why it was so important that the U.S. strike at this moment.
I don't think it was right to strike at this moment. I think we need to step back a second. 3 days before Israel launched its strikes on Iran, the U.S. and the Iranians were about to meet again for another round of talks on a deal, a diplomatic deal, to move back Iran's capabilities. That Israeli strike disrupted those talks. President Trump pivoted. I think we need to be clear-eyed here and understand that Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has never wanted a diplomatic agreement between the U.S. and Iran on these issues, I think the strike was in part designed, yes, to knock back Iran's nuclear capabilities, but also to sabotage these talks. So the other thing I would just note, there was no imminence to the Israeli attacks or the U.S. attack in the sense that the U.S. intelligence community, the International Atomic Energy Agency, were very clear about the fact that while Iran was just weeks away from amassing enough raw material for a dozen or so nuclear weapons, they were a year or more away from being able to assemble a device small enough and light enough to be delivered a nuclear on a ballistic missile.
All right, well, Daryl Kimball, uniquely qualified to speak on this subject. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
As long as probably forever.
Joining me now for more is ABC News contributor and former Department of Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Elizabeth Newman. Elizabeth, thank you for being here. You were in the Trump administration when President Trump gave the order to take out Iranian General Soleimani. You've said the United States has actually been at war with Iran for decades. What do you mean by that?
Look, I mean, since this current regime took power in 1979, they have been a terroristic regime. It was President Reagan that first designated Iran a state sponsor of terror, and then later in 2019 we designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization. They have been at war and killed many Americans before 9/11. They were responsible for killing more Americans through terrorist attacks than any other terrorist outfit. So there is nothing redeeming about this regime. They have made their intent very clear that they want to eliminate Israel. They want to eliminate the United States. So this October 7th, we have seen quite a bit of a shift in the nature of the fight, and you now see a pretty weakened Iran.
And even directly threaten this president's life. I'm wondering what you think, what kind of retaliation you think we will see from Iran against the United States. And I don't mean just the homeland, although that's part of it. We have 40,000 troops in the region. What do you expect?
Look, Iran is very weak after the last 2 years of these threats. Thankfully, Israel has done quite an amazing job of decimating Hamas, the Houthis, the Hezbollah, all of which are Iranian proxies. These are groups that Iran has used to carry out its war of terror against not only Israel but also the United States and the Western world. They are very weak right now. The regime itself is very weak. You have Israel with air dominance over the entire country of Iran. It really is kind of mind-boggling how weak they are, but they still could do a number of things that would cause damage. They are talking about closing the Strait of Hormuz, which would have an economic impact. They, in the past, have tried to take out energy infrastructure there in the Middle East, and they have in the past attacked our own troops there in the Mideast. Those are probably the most likely
Welcome.
retaliation.
Please like, share, subscribe.
Any additional courses of retaliation militarily with a further reach beyond Israel is unlikely because they are so weakened. But that doesn't mean they couldn't hurt us through other ways. Cyber attacks are
Exactly.
probably the number one cause of concern here in the homeland. We have seen them in the past use cyber attacks both through proxy.
And in case y'all wondering, some people won't think that Iran can't touch us. Trust me, Iran will find a way to touch us. Let's continue.
Hacking groups, as well as more coordinated and organized and sophisticated hacking operations out of Iran proper that have attacked energy infrastructure, transportation, water, wastewater, and look for in the near future.
And Elizabeth, just quickly before we go, odds that this brings them back to the negotiating table?
You know, everybody is trying to guess how this regime is going to handle it. I don't see that they have many options on the table for tremendous force, but I think domestically they do need to show that they still are in control. So we'll probably see some form of small retaliation and then maybe go back to the negotiating table.
Elizabeth Newman, always great to have your expertise part of the conversation. Thank you.
Let's get to the UN Security Council meeting itself.
Tired of dealing with hidden fees, forced PayPal payments, rigid policies? Earth in Tel Aviv and its southern suburbs sustained heavy damage, including many residential buildings and an elder care home. Israel also said it had launched a series of strikes against military targets in Iran, including in Tehran, Tabriz, and beyond. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, said 30 fighter jets had struck dozens of military targets across Iran. Iranian media reported several civilian fatalities, including children, and damage to homes and other civilian infrastructure. Earlier, on 21st June, Israel attacked for a second time since 13 June.
Ain't none of this water cold.
Hitting 6 buildings. According to
I'll be back in a second now.
As of 21st June, 430 people have been killed and more than 3,500 others injured due to Israeli strikes across Iran. Most have been civilians. According to Israeli authorities, 25 Israelis have been killed and 1,300 more have been injured since the beginning of exchanges with Iran. Madam President, the conflict risks engulfing the region in further instability and volatility. Some non-state armed groups aligned with Iran warned against U.S. involvement. Houthis in Yemen and some armed groups in Iraq vowed to attack if the U.S. intervenes in the conflict between Israel and Iran. Iran's parliament
Wow.
expressed support for measures to close the Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime route for global energy transit. Iran's Supreme National Security Council would need to take the final decision. I recall the rights and obligations of all states under international law in relation to maritime navigation. Madam President, the Middle East cannot afford yet another violent conflict where civilians pay the price of military confrontations. And the world will also not despair from the ramifications of this dangerous conflict. I echo the Secretary General's call on Member States and on the members of the Security Council to de-escalate and to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter, notably the obligation to settle the international disputes by peaceful means and other rules of international law. All states must live up to their nuclear commitments. All parties to the conflict must also comply with the relevant rules of international humanitarian law in the conduct of their military operations. There is no military solution to this conflict. We need diplomacy, de-escalation, and confidence building now. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Mr. Yancho, for this briefing, and I now give the floor to Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to thank the Secretary General for his permanent support, the IEA, myself, in discharge of my duties. I also like to thank the Assistant Secretary General for his intervention right now. I have convened a special session of the Board of Governors of the IAEA tomorrow morning in Vienna to continue the consideration of this issue that this body has started today, or has continued today. Secretary General, Madam President, dear permanent representatives, colleagues, the nuclear non-proliferation regime that has underpinned international security for more than half a century is on the line. The dramatic events in Iran have become even more serious, with last night's bombardments
For the light. Thank you for the light.
of the conflict. We have a window of opportunity to return to dialogue and diplomacy. If that window closes, violence and destruction could reach unthinkable levels, and the global non-proliferation regime, as we know it, will crumble and fall. Iran, Israel, Iran, the Middle East need peace, and there is a path for diplomacy. We must return, as the Secretary General just said, to the negotiating table and allow the IAEA inspectors, the guardians of the NPT, to go back to Iran's nuclear sites and account for the stockpiles of uranium, including, most importantly, the 400 kilograms of enriched uranium at 60%. Any agreement, ladies and gentlemen, any arrangement will have as a prerequisite the establishment of the facts on the ground. This can be done only through IEA inspections. IEA inspectors are in Iran, and they must do their job. This will require a cessation of hostilities so that Iran can let the teams to the sites under the necessary safety and security conditions. Any special measures by Iran to protect its nuclear materials and equipment can available to the IAEA, let me update you on what has occurred at Iran's nuclear sites since I last addressed this council 3 days ago. Craters are visible at the Fordo site, Iran's main location for enriching uranium at 60%, indicating the use by the United States of America of ground-penetrating munitions. This is consistent with statements from the United States. At this time, no one, including the IAEA, is in a position to assess the underground damage at Fordo. At the Isfahan nuclear site, additional buildings were hit overnight, with the US confirming their use of cruise missiles. Affected buildings include some related to uranium conversion process. Also, at this site, entrances to tunnels used for the storage of enriched material appear to have been hit. At the Natanz enrichment site, the fuel enrichment plant has been hit again, with the US confirming that it used ground-penetrating munitions. Iran has informed the IAEA there has been no increase in off-site radiation levels at the 3 sites. The situation at all other sites in Iran remains as I described them to you 3 days ago. We continue to monitor the situation and encourage the Iranian regulator to maintain its indispensable contact with the IAEA's Incident and Emergency Center. Madam President, the IAEA has consistently underlined, as stated in General Conference resolutions, that armed attacks on nuclear facilities should never take place and could result in radioactive releases with grave consequences within and beyond the boundaries of the state, which has been attacked. I therefore, again, call on maximum restraint. Military escalation threatens lives and delays the diplomatic solution for the long-term assurance that Iran does not acquire a nuclear weapon. It also threatens the global non-proliferation regime. As I stated 3 days ago and before, I am ready to travel immediately and to engage with all relevant parties to help ensure the protection of nuclear facilities and the continued peaceful uses of nuclear technology in accordance with the agency's mandate. With your support, the IAEA can deploy nuclear safety and security experts to Iran immediately, in addition to our safeguards inspectors wherever they are needed. Madam President, there is arguably no more important and universally supported endeavor than ensuring that we use the enormous power of the atom for good rather than destruction. Let us not allow the window to close on diplomacy. Let us not allow the non-proliferation regime to fail. Irrespective of individual positions and views, one thing is certain, and this is the simple truth. We will not be safer if there are more nuclear weapons in more states around the world.
Talk about
The
it.
IAEA is ready to do its part to bring this this military confrontation to an end. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Grossi for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who may wish to make statements.
It's too damn hot
I
for
give the
this,
floor to
man.
the representative of the
It's
Republic
too
of Korea.
damn hot.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I'd like to express my appreciation to Guyana, President of the Security Council, for promptly convening today's meeting at this increasingly precarious moment. I thank the Secretary General for his powerful statement. I also appreciate IAEA Director General Rossi and FX Convention for their informative briefings. In just over a week, this council has met 3 times, yet regrettably each session has witnessed a further escalation of tensions. The Republic of Korea reiterates its profound concern over the deteriorating situation in the Middle East and expresses its sincere hope for urgent de-escalation.
I'll be back in a second.
When we gathered last Friday, we voiced our hope that a renewed opening for diplomacy might emerge. It is lamentable that in a matter of only 2 days, the hope seems even more distant than before. Despite the deeply concerning developments in recent days, the Republic of Korea remains firmly convinced that no sustainable resolution to this crisis military means alone. Indeed, now more than ever, we implore all parties to recognize that diplomacy is not merely an option but an urgent necessity. We call on all sides to exercise maximum restraint and to commit in earnest to restoring dialogue and engagement in liberating diplomatic efforts. Madam President, at this perilous moment, it is vital to prevent a further downward spiral. We therefore reiterate our call for full respect for the UN Charter and international law, and the safeguarding of the international non-proliferation regime. Any indiscriminate attacks against the civilians or civilian objects are prohibited. This is an absolute principle and must be apparent, especially as the situation grows ever more volatile. The Republic of Korea highly appreciates the IAEA for its unwavering efforts to ensure nuclear safety and security under these extremely challenging circumstances. We also remain mindful of the safeguards implications of the current crisis. All parties need to return to the table, so both military actions and nuclear safeguards concerns can come to an end. In conclusion, Madam President, it is imperative to avoid any further military escalation and to prevent the spread of the conflict. We strongly hope that a renewed window for diplomacy will open again. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, thank you for convening this emergency meeting of the Security Council. The gravity of the situation in the Middle East demands the Council's immediate attention as it discharges its primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security. I thank His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his introductory statement. I also thank Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Janka and Director General Farah Grossi of the IAEA for their timely and important briefings. Sierra aligns with the Secretary General's call for immediate de-escalation to avert, and I quote, catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, and the world, end of quote. While guided by our earlier interventions at meetings held on the 14th and 20th June on this situation, the alarming developments compelled this Council to act with urgency. We are concerned to note that less than 24 hours ago, the United States of America struck nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Earlier that day, the State of Israel launched further strikes on the Isfahan complex. Iran also responded with missile launches at Israel. We take note of Director General Scursi's briefing on the off-site radiation in the nuclear facilities hit by the strikes. The event, however, heightened the risk of radiological disaster and increased civilian suffering. Israel is deeply concerned by these military strikes, particularly as they target nuclear installations and densely populated areas in Iran and Israel. Even as we recognize the complexities of the this development call for a new commitment to the principles of the UN Charter and international law. The use of force is among the most serious matters before this Council. Article 2 of the Charter oblige all member states to refrain, and I quote, from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. End of quote. In this instance, we note with concern that the strikes were conducted without Council authorization, nor was there a clear invocation of the right of self-defense under Article 51 in response to or an imminent armed attack. As we approach the 80th anniversary of the Charter, born of a collective resolve to, and I quote, save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, end of quote, we are witnessing actions that undermine its promise. These attacks starkly contrast the spirit of collective security in San Francisco. We underscore that collective security remains the bedrock of the rules-based international order and calls for Charter. Madam President, the targeting of nuclear facilities heightens our concerns. International humanitarian law requires particular caution regarding such sites due to the potential for grave humanitarian and environmental harm. The IAEA has repeatedly affirmed that attacks would threat against nuclear facilities. The Charter, IAEA statute, and international law. Stress the critical importance of upholding the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the cornerstone of the global non-proliferation and disarmament architecture. The NPT prevents nuclear weapons proliferation and provides a framework for addressing concerns related to peaceful nuclear energy. Actions outside this framework risk undermining the treaty's authority and effectiveness. We urge all parties to utilize the NPT mechanisms, including through the IAEA, to address legitimate concerns and upgrade measures that make this vital instrument of international peace and security. Madam President,
I hope you guys can hear it.
Letter of 21, 1st June 2025, Israel's communication citing self-defense, and the joint letter from France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. These underline the mounting claims and counterclaims, reinforcing this Council's duty to uphold the Charter. In this regard, Israel therefore advances the following points. First, we call for an immediate comprehensive ceasefire. Continued hostilities risking a wider regional conflict, destabilizing maritime routes, and uncertain fragile energy markets. There is no military solution. We urge all parties to engage in diplomatic talks and resume structured dialogue towards restoring resolution 2021 and the joint comprehensive plan of action before immediate measures expire on 18th June 2025. The potential border consequences of an escalating conflict must not be overlooked. The disruption of key shipping lanes could severely affect small and developing economies, particularly those still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, and gravely reduce debt distress. Risk inflaming our human and common insecurities, economic distress, disaffection among youth, irregular migration, and fragile social cohesion far beyond the region. Second, we demand strict protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We've already been briefed by SGN Chad on the civilian casualties in Iran as well as in Israel since 13th June. Hospitals, power stations, and homes have suffered damage. We call for safe corridors for medical evacuation and humanitarian relief in line with international law. Third, we emphasize that the NPT remains central to global security. We urge Iran to continue full cooperation with the IAEA and resolve outstanding safeguarding issues. We equally urge all states to protect the integrity of the NPT. Fourth and lastly, we support full IAEA verification, transparent use of the Google channel, and provisional application of the additional protocol as confidence-building measures essential to regional stability. In closing, Madam President, we must recall that immense power brings immense responsibility. States, including those entrusted with great power by the UN Charter, have a duty to act in ways that uphold peace, security, and the whole space order. Sitting aside the Charter's principle is weakening safeguards that protects us all and may embolden unilateral actions elsewhere. At this difficult moment, Sierra Leone appeals for de-escalation, restraint, and the pursuit of diplomacy. Let us remember that behind geopolitical decisions are the lives of ordinary people, men, women, and children, who look to this council to safeguard their peace, security, and dignity. We hope that our actions will honor that trust and the promise of San Francisco. I thank you.
The representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you for convening this meeting. I'd like to start by thanking the Secretary General, ASG Yanka, and DG Grossi for briefing us today. This is a pivotal moment for the region. A further spiral of conflict poses serious risks to regional and international peace and stability. Our foremost priority must now be to support de-escalation. We have long made clear that Iran must not have a nuclear weapon, and that their nuclear program represents a serious threat to international peace and security. The United States took action last night to alleviate that threat. The United Kingdom did not participate in US or Israeli strikes. But military action alone cannot bring a durable solution to concerns about Iran's nuclear program. My Prime Minister has been clear. We urge Iran now to show restraint, and we urge all parties to return to the negotiating table and find a diplomatic solution which stops further escalation and brings this crisis.
Now, y'all want to talk about diplomatic solution, all this, that, and the third. But the thing is, will they be open to a diplomatic solution is the question.
To an end. It is in
Be
the
right back,
interests
y'all.
of all parties to pursue such a deal. This was the joint call made by my Prime Minister with his French and German counterparts earlier today. Together with our E3 partners, the UK has long pursued a diplomatic solution to address Iran's nuclear escalation. On Friday, alongside E3 and EU colleagues, my Foreign Secretary met Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi in Geneva to press directly for a return to diplomacy. My Foreign Minister spoke to Foreign Minister Araghchi again today and stressed the urgency of this, and we continue to engage partners across the region. President, the UK reiterates its full support for the IAEA and Director General Grossi for their critical work, professionalism, and impartiality. The IAEA and the Non-Proliferation Treaty are key pillars of international security. Threats against IAEA staff and the DG are unacceptable. We urge Iran to cooperate fully with the IAEA. Failure to do so will only further fuel escalation. President, now is the time for de-escalation and a return to diplomacy. It is essential Iran chooses this path. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I first of all wish to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for his statement 2 days following the statement he made when he warned us about just how grave the situation was. I wish to also thank the Assistant Secretary General, Mr. Miroslav Žilča, and I thank the Director General from the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Rafael Grossi. I thank them all for their briefings that bear witness to the extremely grave nature of the situation. Madam President, it is with concern that France learned of the strikes conducted by the United States against 2 nuclear sites in Iran. France did not participate neither in the planning nor conduct of these operations. We urge all parties to demonstrate the utmost restraint and to prevent any and all risks of escalation. Now is the time for strikes to cease, for de-escalation and for negotiation. Civilian populations must be spared at a time when strikes exchanged between Iran and Israel have produced too many civilian victims. We particularly call upon Iran to refrain from all reprisals, to cease its nuclear escalation and to opt for diplomacy, as we encourage them to do on last Friday in Geneva. That was also the message conveyed by the President of the Republic, Emmanuel Macron, to his Iranian counterpart during a talk today. It is of imperative importance to guarantee the region's stability. The President of the Republic also spoke today with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the Sultan of Oman, the President of UAE, and the Emir of Qatar to convey that we were fully engaged on this matter. The conflict broadening in scope would pose a grave risk to Israel's security, for the security of the region, and for international peace and security. That is the common message espoused by the President of the Republic and shared with Britain and Germany and their leaders. We took note of the statements made by the IAEA, according to which no increase in levels of radioactivity had been seen around the strike sites struck. I hear support, France's full support for the DG of the IAEA and its personnel. Once again, in difficult circumstances, the personnel and the Director General are demonstrating their professionalism and devotion. Iran must, as a matter of urgency, return to the path of full cooperation with the agency. Madam President, we always affirm that Iran must not and could not ever obtain a nuclear weapon. Iran acquiring such a weapon would constitute a threat for the security of Israel and the region. It would also pose a direct threat to the security interests of France and Europe and would imperil the international non-proliferation architecture. France's position has remained unchanged for more than 20 years. There is only a diplomatic solution to the crisis provoked by the Iranian nuclear program. That conviction in recent days prompted France alongside its EU partners to take the initiative of discussions with Iran. The Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, was in Geneva on Friday for that meeting with his Iranian counterpart and his partners in E3 and the European Union. In that framework, we once again voiced our concerns sparked by the Iranian nuclear program. The dangerous escalation of that program has been documented in recent years by IAEA. They said they were not able to assure its feasible nature. We reaffirmed our resolve to ensure that Iran never acquire a nuclear weapon in accordance with its obligations under the Non-Proliferation Treaty and the 2015 agreement commitments. We have expressed our desire to continue discussions with Iran to allay concerns raised by the Iranian nuclear program and to address more broadly the security problems posed at a regional level by the destabilizing actions of Iran. This conviction remains today. Only a negotiated diplomatic solution can allow for a lasting settlement to the Iranian nuclear issue. France remains ready to contribute alongside its European partners to seek such a diplomatic solution. We must return to negotiations with a view to achieving a robust, verifiable and long-term solution vital in order to allow the agency to assure that the Iranian nuclear program is entirely peaceful. That is not the case today. That is the only way that we can guarantee the stability of the region and global peace and security. Madam President, let us never forget that the region in Gaza is already facing a protracted war with devastating humanitarian consequences. We call for an allegiance for the unfettered delivery of humanitarian aid throughout the Gaza Strip and for the immediate unconditional release of hostages, French remains determined to move toward the implementation of a two-state solution, the only solution liable to allow the Palestinians and the Israeli people to live in peace and security. We will continue to work towards a resumption of the conference mandated by the General Assembly. France will co-chair that conference with Saudi Arabia. Madam President, this Council will meet once again in 2 days to consider the implementation of Resolution 2231. That meeting must stand as an opportunity for this Council and for Iran to reaffirm their commitment to diplomacy and the spirit of negotiation which prevailed and allowed the conclusion of the 2015 agreement. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, Madam President.
Saludamos y agradecemos al
And thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his presence and for his important statement.
Extendemos nuestro
We extend
agradecimiento
that
al
gratitude
secretario general
Assistant Secretary General for Europe, Central Asia and the Americas, Mr. Islam Yinter, and to the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Bernard Gross. We thank them both for their invaluable contributions. We welcome the delegation.
Okay, I'm back, y'all.
We note with concern recent events in Iran.
Fully, this is an ambassador to either Spain or Mexico speaking. Again, this is the UN Security Council having an emergency meeting. I will not be playing this whole thing. However, I do want to play enough so that everybody can understand on what's going on. And please, wherever you are, please stay cool. Stay cool, stay cool, stay cool.
And it is not expected that there will be consequences for the health of people or the environment beyond the sites affected. This in accordance with what has been indicated by Iran. For its part, the International Atomic Energy Agency has stated that it will continue monitoring and evaluating the situation in Iran. We recognize the deft and skillful management of by the IAEA. Treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, the NPT, is a central pillar of international law. It has made a decisive contribution to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and to ensure disarmament. Through the NPT, the international community has garnered greater assurances of stability and security, reducing the risks of nuclear weapons becoming a source of confrontation or conflict. We recognize that a lack of trust is a factor exacerbating the situation. However, we know that some might still remain fragile. This Council will be able to play a constructive role to encourage that desire. To achieve that goal, we must all, as we can, urge parties to find a solution which avoids civilian populations becoming victims of an even worse conflict. Madam President, Panama is a small country, but the owner, the responsible owner indeed, of a strategic interstate canal. We will always have recourse to international law as the pathway through which to resolve international disputes that could have global repercussions. As such, we support the immediate cessation of hostilities, with the goal of offering an opportunity to a genuine dialogue, a dialogue which will allow us to bring lasting and peaceful solutions to conflicts. Thank you.
I thank the representative for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative
President. I thank you for convening this emergency open meeting. I also thank Secretary General Guterres for his statement, and ASD Yanta and Director General Grossi for their briefings. Yesterday, the United States conducted strikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. China strongly condemns the U.S. attacks on Iran and the bombing of nuclear facilities under the safeguards of the IAEA. The actions of the United States seriously violate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law, as well as Iran's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. It has exacerbated tensions in the Middle East and dealt a heavy blow to the international nuclear non-proliferation regime. The international community must uphold justice and make concrete efforts to pull down the situation and restore peace and stability. In this connection, I wish to put forward 4 appeals. First, we call for an immediate ceasefire and ending the hostilities. In the context of the abrupt escalation of tensions in the Middle East, China is deeply concerned about the risk of the situation getting out of control. The parties to the conflict, Israel in particular, should reach an immediate ceasefire to prevent a spiraling escalation and to resolutely avoid the spillover of the war. The parties concerned should abide by international law, curb the impulse to use force, and avoid exacerbating conflicts and adding fuel to the fire. Second, we call for effective protection of civilians. The ultimate victims of all conflicts are the innocent people. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian casualties caused by the conflict. Civilians and civilian facilities must not become targets of military operations. And the bottom line of international humanitarian law must not be breached. Parties to the conflict should place the interests and well-being of the people of the country's region above everything else, and make every effort to avoid harm to innocent civilians and refrain from attacking civilian facilities. Third, we call for commitment to dialogue and negotiation. Peace in the Middle East cannot be achieved by the use of force. Dialogue and negotiation are the fundamental way out. At present, diplomatic means to address the Iranian nuclear issue haven't been exhausted, and there's still hope for a peaceful solution. Parties should stay firmly committed to the political settlement of the Iranian nuclear issue and work to bring it back onto the track of a political solution through dialogue and negotiation, with a view to reaching an agreement acceptable to all parties. Fourth, we call for swift actions by the Security Council. The Security Council has the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and cannot stand idly by in the face of a major crisis. Russia, China, and Pakistan have proposed a draft resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the protection of civilians, respect for international law, and the engaging in dialogue and negotiation. We hope that Council members can demonstrate their strong sense of responsibility by jointly supporting the draft resolution to enable the Security Council to fulfill its responsibilities for the maintenance of international peace and security. China stands ready to work with the international community to foster synergy, uphold justice, and make unremitting efforts to restore peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. Let me start by thanking the Secretary General, Secretary General Pietro, and Director General Grossi for the informative and timely briefings. Madam President, this is the third time in 10 days that this Council has been convened an emergency meeting, and rightfully so. The situation is now more dangerous than at any point since June 13. What the Secretary General referred to as a defining moment for our collective future has now become a reality. We have taken note of the military action against nuclear-related sites in Iran and are monitoring with concern the evolving situation very closely. Madam President, allow me to raise the following 3 points. First, we reiterate that all parties show restraint. There is no need for more violence, especially given the potential grave consequences. It is critical for the AEAI inspectors to be able nuclear activity, a check on the status of the stockpiles of enriched uranium, as well as setting up the remaining enriching capabilities of Iran. This is essential as a global non-proliferation architecture and regional and potentially global security come under intense stress. Second, of Iran should never be allowed to have nuclear weapons. We have time and again warned against non-compliance with the legally binding safeguards and JCPOA obligation. Against this background, Israel has a right to protect itself and live in peace and security with its neighbors. We can argue in this chamber, as so many times we have done, on whether Iran's nuclear program was exclusively peaceful or not. However, whatever the case may be, such high levels of enriched uranium in a region as volatile as the Middle East cannot but generate extreme uncertainty and instability. Third, it is of critical importance to ensure that civilians on both sides are protected. Last but not least, taking over the profound relief of future growth demands that as of this time we do not expect that there will be any health consequences for people or the environment outside the targeted sites. Madam President, in closing, allow me to highlight in no certain terms providing de-escalation as a first step towards sustainable peace. The international community, the country with influence, must step in and offer a diplomatic way out, which must include the necessary security assurances. In all parties need to act in full compliance with the UN Charter, international law, and international humanitarian law. So foreseen and self-restraint, we urge all parties to exercise the utmost moderation and engage in dialogue and diplomacy. Thank you.
I thank Representative Rees for the statement, and I give the floor now to Representative Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also thank the Secretary General for his presence and remarks, and Assistant Secretary Janka and Director General Grossi for their briefings and updates. Madam President, we're meeting again today as the situation in the Middle East continues to escalate. Attacks between Israel and Iran have continued since our last meeting on Friday. Civilian casualties and widespread suffering continue to rise on both sides. Last night, a targeted operation was carried out by the United States against 3 nuclear facilities in Iran. The continued escalation in the Middle East is a cause for great concern and poses a grave risk to international peace and security. Madam President, Denmark urges all parties to abide by the obligations under the UN Charter and international law. All parties must ensure protections of civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. Furthermore, and keeping in mind the words of Director General Grossi 2 days ago to this Council, all actions should be taken and the necessary restraint shown to reduce the risk of nuclear accidents, which could have devastating effects for the civilian population and the environment. Madam President, Denmark has persistently underlined that Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. That would be a serious threat to regional and global security. We have repeatedly expressed our concerns about Iran's accelerating nuclear trajectory and the fact that the IAEA is unable to assure that the Iranian nuclear program is exclusively peaceful. We welcome that the IAEA continues to monitor the situation and provide information on the nuclear safety and security implications. And we stress the importance of continued and timely exchange of information between Iran and the IAEA regarding issues related to nuclear safety, security, and safeguards. Madam President, the current trajectory is unsustainable and fraught with danger, not only for the region, but for international peace and security at large. De-escalation is not only necessary, it is urgent. We call on all actors to step back from the brink to prevent further escalation in the Middle East. We urge Iran to engage in negotiations and not to take any further action that could destabilize the region. At this critical moment, it is important that all parties refrain from steps that could lead to serious regional and global consequences. We further stress the need to protect maritime security and international trade routes, including via the Strait of Hormuz. Madam President, in closing, now is the time to return to negotiations in order to reach a diplomatic solution. We call on all parties to exercise the utmost restraint and to engage ultimate diplomatic negotiated solution, which is the only viable path towards lasting peace in the region and beyond. Denmark stands ready to work with all parties to that effect. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we're grateful to President Guyana for swiftly convening today's meeting of the UN Security Council linked to the acutely dangerous developments in the East developments, which are been further exacerbated by the overnight US strikes on Iranian sites. We'd like to thank the UNSG for its keynote address, as well as to ASG Yencha and DG Crossing for their briefings. Russia condemns in most decisive terms the irresponsible, dangerous, and provocative actions committed by the USA against the Islamic Republic of Iran, a sovereign member state of the United Nations. As we know, in the early hours on the 22nd of June, the U.S. Air Force, in full cooperation and coordination with the Israeli Air Force, an Air Force which for over a week, in violation of the basic principles of international law, has been conducting massive strikes on Iranian infrastructure and sites, they together launched an unprovoked missile and bomb attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, sites under IAEA safeguards, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. In so doing, Washington yet again demonstrated its complete contempt for the position of the international community. Washington reasserted that to further the interests of its Israeli ally, it's prepared not only to turn a blind eye to the killings of tens of thousands of Palestinian women, children, and older persons, but also to gamble with the safety and well-being of humanity as a whole. Through their actions, the US has opened a Pandora's box. No one knows what new catastrophes and suffering it will bring. In the last 10 days, we heard 3 briefings from the IAEA DG Rafael Grossi. He cautioned that strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure could have absolutely unpredictable repercussions, as well as that they pose a major threat to both nuclear safety and security, not only in Iran, but also in the region and the world. Yet Washington is clearly unconcerned. It's unconcerned by either the radiological consequences nor the threat to the lives and health of a huge number of people, civilians including women and children in the region and beyond. Washington, much like West Jerusalem, sees itself as the highest judge in the land, vested with the right to mete out justice as it sees fit. Thus, the US has confirmed that in order to safeguard their global hegemony, it's prepared to commit any crimes, any violations of international law. Let me remind you that no one gave the US the authority to act in such a way. We insistently offered our US colleagues our mediation services so as to find a peaceful, mutually agreeable solution surrounding the Iranian nuclear program. Yet our US colleagues are clearly not interested in diplomacy today. Responsibility for this falls squarely on the shoulders of the US leadership, especially given that it is the US leadership that not only publicly acknowledged its responsibility for these actions, but actually flaunted it, demonstrating wholesale disregard for the norms of international law and the UN Charter, as well as Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 487 and Resolution 2231, as well as the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. Madam President, just 2 days ago, here in this very chamber, we heard from many delegations, including the closest allies of the US. They called for a de-escalation and for the settlement of differences around the negotiating table. Yet our US colleagues yet again ignored this position, the position of the entire international community, following Israel's lead. Instead of checking Israel, instead of forcing it to halt the spiral of escalation, today we once again will be hearing from the US representative. We'll be hearing cynical statements about readiness to return to the negotiating table, as if there were no strikes using heavy payload bombs on Iran. Clearly, this is being done to hypercritically subsequently portray Tehran as the party that's for the negotiations process, the party that's supposedly undermining stability in the Middle East. Yet we believe that none of our sensible colleagues in the international community will believe our US colleagues anymore, much like they won't believe their attempts to convince the Security Council that Iran was trying to acquire nuclear weapons. Let me remind you that back in March, high-ranking U.S. intelligence officials said that the U.S. does not have information about Tehran's attempts to develop military nuclear capabilities. I imagine that many are getting a nagging sense of deja vu today. Let me remind you that back in 2003, in this very chamber, the U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell, waved around a test tube, justifying Washington's plans to invade the territory of another sovereign state, only to having waged decades of chaos onto its people, to not find any WMDs there. Today's situation is no different in substance to the one we saw in 2003. Again, we're being asked to believe U.S. fairy tales to once again inflict suffering on millions of people living in the Middle East. This cements our conviction that history has taught our U.S. colleagues nothing. We regret that today some of you in this room didn't and cannot muster up the courage to call a spade and to condemn Washington's actions. And it's very strange to be participating in this theatre of the absurd, this cynical theatre. We had the representative of the UK calling on Iran to exercise restraint, a country which was subjected to an unprovoked attack, which was bombed and had its nuclear sites bombed, as if it were Iran, not Israel, and the US that was escalating the situation as much as possible. They're calling on Iran to exercise restraint. This is something other council members are doing. We've seen a lot of hypocrisy in this room, but this takes the biscuit. This is a surprising example of hypocrisy on the part of those who, over the last few days, has been whipping up tensions regarding Resolution 2231, which will soon expire. Madam President, throughout the last week, we witnessed a new, highly dangerous wave of escalation. Last night, the situation became wholly unprecedented in nature. The radiological repercussions of the US attacks remain to be assessed, and we're counting on the IAEA and its Director General to issue a clear-cut, professional and impartial analysis of the situation, including by presenting an objective report at the emergency session of the Board of Governors of the IAEA. Yet it's already clear that strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, including those conducted by one of the NPT's depositories, the US, that these attacks amount to a colossal attack on the global NPT regime, non-proliferation regime. They not only deal a blow to the authority of the IAEA, they also deal a blow to the entire system of inspection and control implemented by the agency. They also destroy the basis of the system of international cooperation, including de facto risking casting back into the era of nuclear risks. Seemingly, this is what Washington and Western Jerusalem are seeking. The Russian Federation, as a responsible state and a permanent member of the Security Council, cannot abide such a scenario. We cannot support it. Iran, as per the NPT, has the right to develop its civilian nuclear program. Overnight, the US has de facto nullified years of diplomatic efforts aimed at ensuring compliance with this fundamental principle. Agreeing with the legality of US actions is tantamount to throwing out all of the international community's advances on this front. And since we talked about the importance of the NPT and the global non-proliferation regime today, I'd like to remind you that Israel has not yet acceded to the NPT. Thus, it cannot be a comprehensive IAEA inspections program vis-a-vis Israel. As for Iran, in keeping, let me remind you that Israel has not acceded to the NPT, so no comprehensive IAEA inspections program vis-a-vis Israel is being implemented. As for Iran was and remains the most monitored IAEA state in the world. And instead of supporting Iran, we're getting bombardments of this country, including its civilians. This is a country, and this is being done by a country which has in principle refused to sign the NPT. This is an outrageous, cynical situation. It's very strange that the IAEA DG did not say a word about this. Nor did he call on Israel to join the NPT, not once. Madam President, I think that everyone in this room can see full well that unless we stop the escalation, the Middle East will find itself on the verge
large-scale conflict with unpredictable consequences for the entire international security system. Plus, the entire world might end up on the verge of a nuclear disaster. We call for an immediate cessation of aggressive actions by Israel and the US, restraint on the part of all parties, and return into the fold of international diplomacy and the negotiation process. Yet, calls on the part of UN Security Council members are not enough. Based on the provisions of the UN Charter, and these are the very same provisions that those who have hypocritically stayed silent today call for respect for in other cases. On the basis of these provisions, the Security Council is simply duty-bound to craft a collective decision which would make unacceptable strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure, which are under IDA safeguards. To this end, we need, first and foremost, a clear-cut legal and political assessment of what happened. For all those who are not pursuing any hidden agendas nor double standards, this is patently obvious. To this end, the Russian Federation, China and Pakistan have prepared and disseminated this morning a short and balanced UN Security Council draft resolution, including a call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and for a search for a diplomatic solution surrounding the Iranian nuclear program. The text reflects the positions of an overwhelming majority of Security Council members expressed at our meetings held on the 13th and 20th of June. We're counting on the support of all Security Council members to ensure that the Council can, as soon as possible, send a signal about the need to immediately end the violence, something that the Secretary General again called for in Toledo. Unless the Security Council takes a clear-cut and principled position, further escalation is inevitable. We call on all Security Council members to adopt a responsible approach and to support the proposed draft. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation, and I give the floor now.
I'm going to end it here. Basically, what we need is a diplomatic solution and to de-escalate. With that being said, good night.